February 3rd, 1959 will always be known as the day the music died. For on that night, three young musicians, trying to escape a frozen school bus, crashed into the cold earth, and three young stars entered rock and roll heaven. What we do know about the event is that Buddy Holly had chartered the plane for two of his members of the band as well as himself. Those members were Tommy Allsup, and the other member was Waylon Jennings. All Holly wanted was a warm place to spend the night and to launder his clothes, and to get off the freezing school bus, which had already claimed his drummer for the tour, Carl Bunch, when the drummer was placed into the hospital for frostbite on his feet. When word got out to the fellow performers that a plane was being chartered, the Big Bopper had decided that he would like to take the place of Waylon Jennings, so he made an offer to Waylon. He offered him his brand new sleeping bag that his wife had purchased in exchange for the ticket for the plane. The other seat was also open, and Ritchie Valens had asked for the seat of Tommy Allsup. But Tommy Allsup, he wanted to make the flight because his parents had sent a check by Western Union and he had to pick up the money. So there was a little argument on who should get the last seat. What was odd was that Ritchie Valens had a very real fear of flying. When he was in junior high school, he used to sit under a tree and all the students would come at lunch and listen to him play his guitar. One day, Ritchie Valens went to his uncle's funeral. While there, two planes collided in midair and the wreckage fell into the schoolyard. Ritchie Valens' best friend was killed. From that point on, Ritchie Valens had a little terror of flying. But for whatever reason, he kept asking Tommy Allsup, "Please let me have the last seat." And Allsup stood firm. When they got to the airport, Buddy Holly asked Tommy Allsup to go back and to make sure all the equipment was packed. When Allsup went back, Ritchie Valens was waiting. And he said, "Listen, Tommy, let's flip a coin." Finally, Tommy Allsup agreed, reached into his pocket, took out a $50, flipped it in the air, told Ritchie to call it, and Ritchie said, "Heads." When it landed, it was heads. Probably the most surprised person there was Ritchie Valens, because he looked at everyone around and he said, "This is the first time I ever won." They go to the airport. The Big Bopper gets in first behind the pilot, Ritchie Valens next, and as Buddy Holly gets into the plane, he looks at his friend Waylon Jennings and he says, "Waylon, I hope your old school bus freezes." And Waylon Jennings looks back to Buddy and he goes, "Yeah, and I hope your old plane crashes." Waylon Jennings never got over the statement. It haunted him the rest of his life. Because shortly after takeoff, within 9 miles of the airport, the Beechcraft Bonanza crashed into the earth and the bodies of the three rock stars were tossed to the frozen ground. When the investigators got there, they found a number of candy wrappers, and for some reason, they felt that candy wrappers may equate that the performers had been using drugs, which probably is as ludicrous today as when it was first said. One of the puzzles was, why was the Big Bopper's body thrown 40 feet in front of the plane with Ritchie Valens and Buddy Holly next to it? This haunted the Big Bopper's son, J.P. Richardson Jr. J.P. was born a few months after his father's death, never got to know him. But a few years ago, J.P. Richardson had his father's body dug up, and he had a forensic investigation done to determine whether his father had lived in agonizing pain for a few minutes and that he wasn't killed instantly. Why was his body 40 feet in front of the plane in the frozen cornfield? Dr. Bass of the Body Farm in Knoxville, Tennessee performed the autopsy. What Dr. Bass's findings were was that the Big Bopper had died instantly from multiple fractures. That gave his son some relief, but there were other legends. For instance, it was claimed that there was a bullet hole in the back of the pilot's seat. Conjecture says that perhaps the Big Bopper, who was a very tall man and heavy, had tried to change positions with Buddy Holly as the plane was taking off. Everyone also knew that Buddy Holly carried a gun in his briefcase. Well, to make it even more interesting, after the plane wreckage was removed, Buddy Holly's handgun was found under it. And when the gun was found in the spring, they noticed the gun had been fired twice. Everyone thought perhaps the gun had gone off. There were even rumors that there was a fight on the plane. But it was determined that the farmer who owned the property had found the gun and fired it himself twice to make sure the gun still worked. One of the other great myths of the plane crash that has been predetermined. The plane's wreckage is still in a hangar, and maybe very shortly A new forensic study will be determined on what happened the day the music died. Roger Peterson, the pilot, was blamed for not being able to read his equipment. The owner of the plane claims that his pilot was incapacitated. For whatever reason, we may never know what happened in those fateful minutes. But that is the purpose of a legend, isn't it? This is Gary Patterson. Thanks for walking with me on the dark side. You know, you may think some of these stories are fact and some are fiction, but one thing for certain, you'll never listen to your music exactly the same way again.